Just after midnight on May 1st, 1967, Elvis Presley climbed over the backyard wall of his Palm Springs home. He was trying to get married without anyone finding out. A car was waiting in the street behind the house. The wedding party, 14 people slipped out one by one and got in. They drove to Palm Springs Airport. Frank Sinatra's private Learjet, the one he called Christina II, was waiting on the runway. At 3 in the morning, Elvis and Priscilla flew to Las Vegas, got their marriage license at 4, and were married at the Aladdin Hotel before 9 in the morning. Before the press, before the fans, before the world knew what was happening. Sinatra had arranged the jet, quietly, without fanfare, without asking for anything in return. The man who arranged that escape was, in 1957, the same man who had written that rock and roll was the music of cretinous goons. The man who had called Elvis's entire musical world brutal and ugly and the most vicious form of expression it has been my misfortune to hear. 7 years later, he loaned Elvis his most prized possession for the most private night of Elvis's life. This is the story of how that happened. How two men who had every reason to remain enemies became something that neither of them ever publicly celebrated, but both of them quietly depended on. How Frank Sinatra decided at some point in the years between 1957 and 1967 that Elvis Presley was his friend. And what he did about it. To understand what Frank Sinatra's jet meant on that May morning, you have to go back 10 years. To the public argument that was supposed to make them permanent enemies. In 1957, Frank Sinatra was 42 years old, and he had been the dominant figure in American popular music for 15 years. He had survived his own professional collapse in the early 50s and come back stronger, with Capitol Records and Nelson Riddle and a string of albums that critics placed among the finest recordings of the century. He was the voice. He was the chairman of the board. He wrote a piece for a French publication called Western World. In it, he called rock and roll music the product of cretinous goons. He called it brutal and ugly and the martial music of every sideburns delinquent on the face of the earth. The American press picked it up and sharpened it into a direct attack on Elvis Presley. Elvis heard about it. He did not fire back with equal force. He said, carefully and without malice, that he admired Sinatra as a performer and an actor. He said he thought Sinatra was badly mistaken. And he left it there. This measured response was more devastating than any insult he could have offered. It showed that Elvis understood something that Sinatra at that moment did not, that the music was going to do the arguing for both of them. If this is the kind of story you come to this channel for, the real history underneath the public record, please subscribe. There are more of these. We are committed to telling them properly. In July of 1959, while Elvis was in Germany, it was announced that upon his release from the Army, Elvis Presley would make his first television appearance on Frank Sinatra's variety show. Sinatra paid Elvis $125,000 for 8 minutes of television time, more than Sinatra's own fee for hosting the entire program. He was not pleased about the number, but he understood the arithmetic. What Sinatra did not anticipate was what would happen during the week of rehearsals. They rehearsed at the Fontainebleau together for a week before the taping. They sang each other's songs. Elvis took Sinatra's Witchcraft, Sinatra took Elvis's Love Me Tender. And in the process of doing that, in the daily proximity of a working rehearsal, away from management and press and the machinery of both their public lives, something shifted between them. The people who were there described what they saw as the ease of two people discovering, slightly to their own surprise, that they liked each other. The Welcome Home Elvis special aired on May 12, 1960, and it drew 41.5% of the American television audience. The second-ranked program in that time slot drew 21. Sinatra's instinct had been correct. But the friendship that developed after the taping was about something quieter. Sinatra knew, after that week in Miami, that Elvis was not what his 1957 dismissal had suggested. He was a serious performer with a serious voice who had made serious choices and was going to be around for a long time. Elvis, for his part, had grown up listening to Sinatra. His personal record collection at Graceland contains many Sinatra albums. The meeting at the Fontainebleau confirmed what he had always believed from a distance. They did not move in the same circles after the special. They did not perform together again, but they stayed in touch. And when something important happened, they showed up for each other. By the spring of 1967, Elvis Presley had been with Priscilla Beaulieu for 8 years. He was finally ready to make good on the promise he had made to her family. The problem was the press. Colonel Parker decided the wedding should happen in Las Vegas, quickly, quietly, with as few people present as possible. The location was the Aladdin Hotel. The timing was early morning. The guest list was 14.
Yes, I'm ready.
What remained was the problem of getting there from Palm Springs without anyone knowing.
It's really happening.
Frank Sinatra's Learjet, the Christina II, was in Palm Springs with Sinatra on the night of April 30th. Sinatra offered it. Not because anyone pressured him or because there was a business arrangement involved. He offered it because Elvis needed a way to get to Las Vegas at 3 in the morning without the press finding out. And Sinatra had a jet. And that was the end of the calculation. George Klein, who was there, wrote in his memoir, Elvis had been loaned Frank Sinatra's private jet for the occasion. 6 words, completely without drama. That is exactly the register in which it happened. The plane landed in Las Vegas. The wedding party went to the Aladdin Hotel through the rear entrance.
I do.
At 4 in the morning, Elvis and Priscilla received their marriage license. Before 9 in the morning on May 1st, 1967, they were married. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes, 14 guests. The rest of the world found out when Colonel Parker held a press conference afterward. By the time the press arrived, the most important part of the day was already done. Frank Sinatra's jet had made it possible. The friendship continued after that morning and lasted until Elvis's death in August of 1977. Elvis kept Sinatra records at Graceland. Both men recorded their own versions of My Way. When you know about the history between the two men, the public dismissal, the television show, the week of rehearsals, the jet at 3 in the morning, it sounds less like coincidence. When Elvis died, Sinatra said, "There have been many accolades uttered about Elvis's talent and performances through the years, all of which I agree with wholeheartedly. I shall miss him dearly as a friend. He was a warm, considerate, and generous man." He was not performing those words for the cameras. He had performed in front of cameras for 40 years. He knew what performed grief looked like. This was something else. The story of Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley is usually told as a rivalry. What it misses is the decade that followed. The week of rehearsals at the Fontainebleau, the Learjet at 3 in the morning, the Sinatra records kept at Graceland. The statement after Elvis died that was not a performance but a reckoning. The cretinous goons comment of 1957 was Frank Sinatra at his most defensive. It was not his finest moment. He was wrong. And the subsequent 20 years of his relationship with Elvis were, among other things, a long and quiet acknowledgement of that. What happened instead was Frank Sinatra at something closer to his best. Not the performance, the person. Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977. He was 42 years old. Sinatra outlived him by 21 years. In the years between, he talked about Elvis with the specific warmth of someone who had known the man rather than the image. Warm, considerate, generous. 3 words from a man who spent his life choosing words carefully. 3 words that were worth more coming from Frank Sinatra than most people's eulogies. A Learjet at 3 in the morning, a week of rehearsals, a decade of keeping in touch. a few words after it was over. That is the whole story. That is what the friendship was. If this is the kind of Elvis history you want to keep watching, subscribe to the channel. There are more moments, more people, and more untold stories still to document. And if you have a memory of either of these men, a song, a moment, something that stayed with you, leave it in the comments. This community understands what it means to carry music with you for a lifetime. We want to hear from you.